This is Kris, the Director of Professional Practice and Development here at Engineers Nova Scotia. Pleased to be able to talk to you today. This short session regarding the Code of Ethics here at Engineers Nova Scotia and the Complaints and Discipline process. So we're going to talk a bit about the Engineering Profession Act and reference as we go along today, and also the Code of Ethics. A new Code of Ethics was adopted in 2003. If you don't have a copy of that in front of you, I ask that you please go and download a copy of that from our website. It would be just under the link that you clicked to get this presentation. That will be helpful to follow through and maybe make notes as you go. So I'll give you a second. Go do that, pause it, go do that, and then come back. So the Engineering Profession Act, for those of you who haven't read it, I've usually asked people in the session if they've read it, and most people say they haven't, but it is a long document. It does outline a lot of the procedures and processes that we have here to regulate ourselves as engineers in the province of Nova Scotia. It's a long document, but it's very useful for us here as council and staff. We did introduce the code in 2013. It took the number of tenets of the Code of Ethics from 24 down to 9. It was adopted from Engineers Canada, and we were one of the first in Canada we actually were the first to fully adopt the Engineers Canada Code of Ethics. So working to try to have a consistent Code of Ethics for all the engineering constituent associations across Canada. It's done a lot of things such as make this Code of Ethics more gender neutral. It's a lot more modern as well. So it's we're happy that we adopted it here at Engineers Nova Scotia. So I'm going to go right into the 9 tenets of the Code of Ethics. I tell people when I'm presenting this, and I presented to sessions all across Nova Scotia. We hit quite a few, probably 500 members have heard this presentation. They found it quite useful. It gives them a chance to reflect on the Code of Ethics, which as engineers here in the province, we may not do that as often as we probably should, but know that we are on the hook for everything that's contained in this Code of Ethics. So it's a good time to sit down and reflect on the Code of Ethics and what we are, what obligations are as professional engineers and engineers in training here at Engineers Nova Scotia. So the first tenet of the Code of Ethics speaks around public safety and ensuring that the safety, health, and welfare of the public and the environment and promoting health and safety in the workplace are certainly paramount and must be achieved before anything else when you're in your practice, your daily practice. The meaning of the word paramount basically speaks that everything else doesn't matter as long as if public safety is not being achieved, then all the other aspects of the Code of Ethics aren't as important. So they're all very important, but unless safety's in mind, then it's there's going to be a bigger problem there. So noted here that the duty to the public may override your duty to the client. This is from our, we have a manual of professional practice which is available under the professional practice section on the Engineers Nova Scotia website. And we'll speak a bit more about this duty to the public and duty to report later on, but the manual of professional practice is a great document. We will be revising it in the next year and updating it, but it's available and a very good document. And I'll also note that on our website there is a guideline on the Code of Ethics, which is done by Engineers Canada, another very good document for reference to, and something that you might want to have a look at as you digest some of this information following this presentation. I'll note that for new engineers, EITs, this duty to the public and duty to the client is something that a lot of younger engineers struggle with, especially earlier in their careers, as they're still gaining their foothold. And we'll speak a bit to that later on in the presentation. So that is the first tenet of the Code of Ethics. Second one, just merely speaking to making sure you're only undertaking engineering assignments in areas of competence and practicing in a careful and diligent manner. So this, we do have a webinar on the Code of on the Continuing Professional Development Program. There's a direct link here to the CPD program, which I like in this new Code of Ethics. A lot of times we'll get questions from members saying, well, how do I know what areas I'm competent in or not? Or I want to, I was trained in this area and I've switched to this area. Am I okay to practice? And I generally say to them, it's basically as a self-regulated profession, it's up to the individuals to ensure that they're competent in their area of practice. I can't tell you if you're competent. You're the only one who can tell me. And I say to people, if they ask, they say, well, how do I know that? Well, if you're in a situation and you may not be 100% certain whether you're competent or not, or you're having doubts in your work and you think maybe you're not feeling comfortable, I say if you're not feeling comfortable in the practice, you probably have some, you may be going outside your area of competence. So that's usually the buffer for people, that they see that and they're like, oh yeah, I think you're right. Maybe I'll get some help from somebody else, or ask for advice, or get some outside consulting on this situation. So that's a very big one, the linking to the Code of Ethics, or the Continuing Professional Development Program to the Code of Ethics. It's a nice tie, which I like with this new Code of Ethics. Obligation number 3 speaks to confidentiality and conflicts of interest. So in a lot of cases, it's hard to avoid conflicts of interest, especially in a province as small as Nova Scotia. And I'll tell you, just because you know somebody doesn't mean that there's directly a conflict of interest. Knowing that, knowing how small the business community is here, a lot of people know a lot of people in the industries that they're in. I always say to people, the most important part is declaring your conflict of interest. So if you declare it, you say, I realize that I know this person, or I've been involved in this before, and I think there could be a conflict of interest. As long as you declare it and have it out in the air, the parties involved can decide whether it is truly a conflict of interest or not. That's usually the advice we give to people on that. So that's number 3. Tenet number 4 is keeping yourself informed and maintain your competence. So again, this is tied to the previous one around practicing in your area of competence. But particularly this speaks to providing professional development for subordinates. This is really speaks to developing others and sharing information and mentoring, which is really how most people learn. They learn generally in school, but then they learn through experience, and through that experience they are often mentored, or information is passed on from those who they work with. So it's quite important, and this speaks to the fact that you, as a professional engineer, should be passing that information on to those who work with you and for you. Here from the guideline of the Code of Ethics, I pulled a paragraph. Just you should strive to advance the body of knowledge with where you practice, and really furthering professional development of subordinates and colleagues is very important. Sometimes I'll have some older engineers perhaps would say to me, well, I don't really want to share that because then they'll know how to do this, and currently I'm the only one who knows how to do a certain skill, so they may be apprehensive to share that, but really it's it benefits all when you can pass that information on and knowledge on, and that's how the younger generation are going to develop. So that's very important. I like how this Code of Ethics points that a bit more specifically than the old Code of Ethics. Okay. So number 5, this is a very straightforward tenet, treating people with equitably, fairly, giving credit where it's due. An important one here is giving and accepting honest and fair professional criticism. So knowing that you most likely don't know everything there is to know about a certain aspect, and there's always somebody who will know a little bit more than you. But it's ensuring that you take that feedback and criticism and handle it in the right manner, and try to listen to it and adapt it in your practice as you go. So it's really that ongoing learning piece, which is always important, and just treating people the way you want to be treated. So that sums up this obligation number 5. Number 6, presenting to employers and clients the consequences if engineering decisions or judgments are overruled or disregarded. This is a very important one as well. This speaks to the duty to report. So ensuring that people understand what the impacts will be if a certain engineering decision is made, and then reporting, if you're not comfortable with that, reporting it to the through the proper process. We recommend a 3-part process here at Engineers Nova Scotia, and it's reflected too by Engineers Canada. That's part of their guidelines. We think you should discuss the problem with the supervisor or your employer if you see something that doesn't seem right. You should try to work it out first. If you can't receive an adequate response there, you should talk to the most senior person on the job, or the client, or whoever's in charge, and try to see if you can work things out there. And if that doesn't work, we recommend that you contact the association. You can always contact me. My email address is kdove, KDOVE, @engineersnovascotia.ca. And I'll be glad to that, or you can call me at 491-1202. Be glad to talk with you and try to work through things. And this the third, if you get to the third bullet here, really, yeah, people are often concerned, especially young engineers. The last line there, even at the risk of loss of employment, is a big one for engineers. They often don't want to go down that road, but I think, yeah, I think, as I said, if you see a breach to the act code of ethics, you really need to bring it forward, or else you'll personally be on the hook for it. So, very important, and we recommend this is the approach that you follow to help deal with that. Obligation 7. So this is somewhat related to the previous, but this is talking to making sure if you see something that's illegal out there or unethical, you bring it to the proper authorities. In the case of illegal issues, we ask that you bring it to the police or whoever would be involved there. They'll deal with it. We'll generally handle it after any criminal or civil issues are undergone. But if there is an issue that comes up that you're aware of, you should bring it to us for discussion, and it may be a formal complaint. It may have to be lodged in this case. So, and if there's practices by engineers or others people are practicing who aren't licensed as engineers, who are not trained as engineers, we will definitely follow up with them and try to ensure that they stop using the term engineer or engineering, and stop doing engineering if they're not in fact qualified. So we do take that very seriously, and we do follow up quite often with people who are in that situation, who are either using the term or practicing without a license. That's very important. Number 7 is being aware of ensuring that the client's employers are aware of any consequences or actions to engineering issues and projects that are being done. This is a big one. We know that there's engineering decisions that are made. There's often money involved. There's safety involved, but there's also environmental consequences that come up that need to be made aware. So this is ensuring that the client or the employer or whoever you're dealing with, when you make an engineering, when you come up with a methodology or you come up with an idea, that all the consequences are not only determined but also shared with those who need to be shared with. So that's always important. Can't overemphasize that. And the last one, obligation number 9. This is a big one. Speaks to treating people equitably and promoting equitable treatment for. In a lot of cases, this could just probably end in the second sentence, all. So this is hopefully a common sense for most people. And then there's been some debate on this one whether it should just say all, and instead of having different coordinates there. But we'll see how that goes. But that's something we definitely should strive as you are in your daily practice. So at this point, we would have questions, but since this is a recorded webinar, there'll be no questions. But I encourage you, if you do have questions or want clarification on this, to please contact me. My contact information I mentioned earlier, and it's available on our website as well. Next, we're going to talk about the complaints and discipline process, and this is something that a lot of our members don't have a lot of background information on this. And when I present this and they listen to it, they're very surprised at some of the content, but they're also glad to know a bit more about what their rights and responsibilities are under the complaints and discipline process. So I'll recommend you to go to our website if you haven't already. There's a complaints and discipline brochure document there, which further outlines the complaints and discipline process, and it's one that if I receive any new complaints, I always forward that on to the complainant and to the registrant to make sure that they're both aware of the process, and it's helped to explain process quite well, I think. So we'll get right into it here. Some of the guidelines of the complaints process: we want to maintain public confidence and consider all complaints that come through. We want to respect the rights of the registrant. So in this case, we refer to members as being the registrants. You'll hear complainants are the ones who put the complaints forth. Could be a member of the public. We want the complaints process to be fair and transparent as much as we can, knowing that a lot of things are confidential in the process, but we do want to make at least fair and transparent to those who were involved in the process. So the purpose of the process is to ensure the protection of the public, integrity of the profession, and where not in conflict, the rehabilitation of the registrant. So as part of self-regulation, this is really up to us to ensure that we're doing a good job of keeping an eye on our members, making sure that they're practicing where they're competent, and making sure that any issues that come up are reviewed and assessed in an appropriate manner by our association. So we have the complaints process to help us with that. So the complaints committee screens complaints to determine what should happen, and we'll talk about that a bit more. There's several things that could happen when the complaints come in. We'll talk about that further in this presentation. Complaints committee, their mandate is to investigate complaints. So their mandate is to gather as much information as they can about a complaint and determine whether it's bona fide or not whether someone's guilty or not, but whether it's bona fide or not. They comprise of not less than 5 members serving various lengths with possibility of reappointment, and are appointed by Engineers Nova Scotia Council. So I just mentioned the Complaints Committee does not involve making a determination of wrongdoing or imposing reprimands or other sanctions. That's up to the Discipline Committee, and we'll talk about the Discipline Committee after this piece. And the outcome of the investigation is not made public, although we do tell the complainant in the register what the outcome of a Complaints Committee review is. So, but it's not made public. And really, the investigation, if it's at a Complaints Committee stage and there's an outcome, that outcome is only made public if it's deemed to be part of the of what the Discipline Committee deems as the punishment or the what's the fallout from the complaint. So we'll talk about that a bit more as we get further on here. So Section 17 of the Act, if you haven't read it, it's quite complex. It was rewritten 4 or 5 years ago, and it sets out kind of the general high-level direction of what a complaint should follow, but it doesn't dictate the process. We do use the rules of fairness and natural justice and try to have some best practices, which the Complaints Committee in the last year put together a process document where we really tried to flush out a lot of the best practices that we've used in the past and put some thought around how that would work for complaints and how complaints should be handled. So we're trying to have a more consistent process, which I think we've done a good job at with the Complaints Committee process document. So that's underway and is used by the Complaints Committee during their process. But Section 17 of the Act is are basically the guiding principles for how complaints are run. There's a couple of steps. The first role, so Part A, the Complaints Committee needs to investigate a complaint. So they will gather initial evidence. So generally that's a complaint will come in. It will be a formal complaint written letter from either a member or a member of the public. Based on that, we'll gather initial evidence and try to pull together as much information as we can. In a lot of cases, it's one person saying something else did something, but we want to get as much evidence and get the truth as much as we can and get both sides of the story. So they'll assess the complaint, assess the sufficiency of it, fill in the gaps. So if there's more information that's needed, they'll go out and gather that. It could be interviewing certain people or asking for letters for people or bringing in an expert witness. So they'll get as much information as they can to the investigation, then they'll close the investigation. Okay. There's in this case, a lot of going back and forth to the complainant and the registrant. It's not uncommon to have 3 or 4 times. So we'll go back to the complainant, ask for their opinion, then or their information, they'll send that to us, and we'll send it to the registrant, say, is this true? And they'll say, yes, it's true, but there's also more information. We call these the responses. We'll go back several times and try to get it until both parties are happy with the information that we're given. So that's the first part. Part A is the investigation. Part B is the determination. So this is really where the Complaints Committee will meet. They'll review the evidence, they'll assess it, and they'll ask, what's the question? So really, what part of the bylaws, Act bylaws, or Code of Ethics was breached by this member? So was there unprofessional conduct? Was there something illegal? Were they practicing outside of the area of competence? What was the problem? So what is the question here? They'll weigh the evidence and then they'll action the complaint. And by action, again, we're saying that they're simply determining if it is a bona fide complaint, not whether the registrant's guilty or not. They don't register punitive rulings. They just render whether it's a bona fide complaint or not. In this case, punitive refers to inflicting or aiming to inflict punishment or punishing. So they're not looking to punish the member at this point. They're just looking to see if it's a bona fide complaint or not, and then it will If it is, it will go on to the complaints committee. If it's not, there's a few other things that could happen there. Okay, so then they'll make an action on the complaint. They'll either resolve the complaint. So there's cases where complaints aren't deemed to be a public safety issue, and some other non-serious issues. There may be a resolution that can be made. They may dismiss the complaint if they deem that it looked to be a complaint, but it's not. There's not a breach to the Act, bylaws, or code of ethics. Or they can refer the complaint to the discipline committee. So there's ways that this complaint can be put to bed before the discipline committee, depending on the seriousness of it. And there's generally a lot of discussion back and forth with the registrant at this case regarding this. Part C. So if it's referral to the discipline committee, written complaint is written by the complaints committee that's sent to the discipline committee and telling them of the issues that they see. It's a high-level document, and there's no evidence that's disclosed. So the disclosure process is done when they get to the actual discipline hearing stage. Okay, so that's what happens. It's referred to the discipline committee. If the complaint was dismissed, so if it's dismissed by the complaints committee, it can be appealed by a review officer, the decision. So the process. They're not looking at the decision. They're looking at the process that was followed. So it would be sent back to the complaints committee if there are fairness concerns. But a review officer will review that and determine the best course of action, either referring it back for another review, or they can forward it directly to the discipline committee if it's appropriate. Okay. So there is an appeal there, but again, it's not. If a complainant doesn't like the decision, they can't just say, I don't like what you guys decided. They have to say, I don't think the process followed was fairly, and that will be reviewed by a review officer. Okay, that's an important distinction to make. So if a complaint is forwarded to the discipline committee, it'll go to them. They make up not less than 10 members and up to 2 non-members appointed by council. So if a receipt is of a complaint, if a complaint comes to them, they'll appoint up to 5 members of the committee to serve as a discipline hearing panel. So there's 15 members of the complaints committee on the discipline committee right now, so enough for 3 distinct panels of 5 if need be. So in case there's one panel that hears a complaint and it's for whatever reason they need to, it's tainted or they need to go back, they could bring a new complaints or discipline panel in to hear that complaint. Okay. So after the discipline committee reviews the information, they can either have a settlement agreement if it's deemed appropriate. So a settlement agreement can be written by the secretary of the association, but it must be approved by the discipline committee, or they can go to a discipline hearing. And discipline hearing is when you get to this stage, there's generally a lot of lawyers involved, and it's not a very fun time for those involved. Okay, some of the options of a discipline committee: you can cancel or suspend the certificate of registration, impose restrictions, reprimand, direct that it be published. So I mentioned that before. Sometimes publishing the outcome, it could be more damaging to someone's career than some of the other options. Requiring that they undergo treatment or impose a fine or an order of costs will generally try to recover our costs for the trial, and that's happened in the past. Sometimes it gets to be quite expensive, so we'll generally do that. Since it's a webinar, there won't be any questions here, but again, if you have questions about the complaints and discipline process, please contact me, and again, I'll reference you to the complaints and discipline brochure that's on our website. It's a great document and should help answer any more questions that you may have about this. And again, I'll point you to our website, the Act and Bylaws, Code of Ethics, Manual of Professional Practice, CPD guidelines, process brochure are all on there. It's www.engineersnovascotia.ca. So if you need further information on any of the topics here, please go see it. And I'm pleased that you were able to join me on this. Hopefully it was beneficial. You had a chance to reflect on what you're basically signed up for as a registered professional engineer in this province. So I wish you well, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you, and have a great day.